Fair man marked by tragedy, rich enough to buy silence and break hearts. A reclusive virgin raised amidst guilt and shadows without knowing the taste of a true touch. And what seemed like purity soon became the spark of a love that consumes the very soul. If you enjoy stories of love and romance, watch until the end, you won't regret it. Subscribe to this channel and leave a comment telling us where you're listening to this beautiful story from. We now continue. White Point rose imposingly over the rocky cliffs of the South Carolina coast, 30 miles from Charleston. Her colonial mansion of white limestone that reflected the rising sun like an inverted lighthouse, not to warn ships of danger, but to draw them into its mystery. The property had belonged to the Graham family for generations, but after the fire that killed his younger sister, a tragedy he never explained, but also never denied, the heir, Edward Graham, isolated himself from the world, becoming a feared and mythological figure in Charleston's high society circles. Her reclusive entrepreneur who collected art, restored relics, and bought what could not be possessed with love: time, silence, people. They said he lived among shadows, that his presence commanded reverence and discomfort, that no one left White Point the same. But none of that meant anything to Sophia Hayes, a young restorer of rare books, born under the weight of a strict evangelical upbringing in the confines of a small town in the South Carolina Lowcountry. Raised by a widowed mother and aunts dominated by the fear of pleasure, of the body, of the world. Her past was marked by traumatic silences, spiritual punishments, and long periods of confinement. In church, in dark rooms, in herself. Her body, though untouched, carried an invisible trauma. Not for never having been touched, but for never having been seen. Her desire was not for love, but for liberation. The morning was heavy with humidity as Sophia climbed the stone steps to the main entrance of White Point. The Charleston Historical Preservation Institute, where she had worked as a restorer for 2 years, had received a special request. A client who demanded personal delivery of a restored codex, a colonial-era manuscript that collected letters between forbidden lovers, a couple who defied social conventions. The signature on the request was just an initial, e.g. the address remote. The sea wind struck her face as she waited before the immense wrought-iron gate. She had arrived in a taxi that had been reluctant to drive to the end of the winding road. "That place is haunted, miss," the driver, an old man who couldn't stop making the sign of the cross, had said. "They say the souls of slaves still wander the halls." Sophia smoothed down the simple navy blue cotton dress she wore and took a deep breath. Her curly, dark and voluminous hair danced in the wind like an entity of its own. When the gate finally opened, there was no one to greet her. Only a path of ancient stones leading to the main entrance. The solid rosewood door was ajar. Sophia hesitated for a moment, then pushed it open cautiously. The entrance hall was a cathedral of silence. Antique furniture, crystal chandeliers, and a peculiar odor of old books, polished wood, and something indefinable, perhaps the scent of time itself. On the walls, portraits of men and women with stern gazes and clothes from other eras. "Miss Hayes." The deep voice came from somewhere to her right. Sophia turned quickly, feeling her heart race. A tall, imposing man emerged from a side corridor. He wore dark trousers and a white shirt, with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing strong forearms marked by a few scars. He had lightly tanned skin, black hair with streaks of grey at the temples, and hazel eyes that seemed to see right through her. "Mr. Graham?" Sophia asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Edward Graham," he replied with a slight nod. "But I'd prefer you call me Edward." He did not extend his hand to greet her. He just maintained that penetrating gaze, as if cataloguing every detail of her. "I brought the manuscript you requested," Sophia said, opening the leather satchel she carried. "Not here," Edward interrupted. "Come to the library." She followed him down a corridor lined with dark wood panels. Their footsteps echoed on the marble floor, creating a strange symphony with the distant sound of the sea crashing against the rocks. Sophia discreetly observed Edward's broad back, his rigid posture, his deliberate walk. There was something magnetic about him, a silent force that seemed to bend the very air. The library was an impressive room, 2 stories of bookshelves rising to the ceiling, a spiral staircase of wrought iron connecting the levels, tall windows that let in the diffuse light of the cloudy morning. In the center, a rosewood table with elaborate carvings, on it a single red rose in a crystal vase. "My grandmother believed that books need the company of flowers," Edward said, noticing Sophia's gaze on the rose. "She said that books are like people. They need to be reminded that they are still part of the living world." It was the first personal thing he had shared, and Sophia felt a strange comfort in that small glimpse of humanity. "That's a beautiful thought," she replied, placing the carefully wrapped package she carried on the table. She began to undo the protective wrapping, revealing a conservation box made especially for the manuscript. Her slender, skilled fingers moved with the precision of someone who knows the value of what they touch. Edward watched her movements with a disturbing intensity. "Your hands are very precise," he commented, "like a surgeon's." Sophia felt her face grow warm. "I work with wounded books. In a way, I am a doctor of paper and ink." Finally, she revealed the codex, a set of handwritten letters dated 1792, written between the son of a plantation owner and a freed slave woman. A love that defied the social conventions of the time, culminating in their escape to a maroon community deep in the Low Country. "The restoration required meticulous work," Sophia explained, carefully opening the manuscript to show the treated pages. The acidity of the ink had corroded the paper in several places. "We managed to neutralize it and reinforce the fragile areas." Edward moved closer, standing beside her. Sophia could feel the warmth of his body, the woody scent of his cologne. For a moment, the proximity left her breathless. "Do you understand the value of what you've restored, Miss Hayes?" he asked, his voice lower and more intense. "Historically, it's a rare document that portrays a relationship that challenged the social structures of the time," she replied, trying to maintain a professional tone. "No," Edward said, lightly touching one of the pages. "I'm talking about the desperate love in these letters, the courage of two people who knew they were doomed from the start, but still chose to risk everything." Sophia didn't know what to say. There was something in the way Edward spoke that seemed to transcend the boundaries of mere historical appreciation. "Do you believe in fate, Miss Hayes?" The question caught her off guard. "I believe in choices," she answered after a few seconds, "and their consequences." A faint smile appeared at the corner of his lips, the first since she had met him. "Interesting. Most people would simply say yes or no." A silence settled between them, filled only by the distant sound of the waves and the ticking of an old clock somewhere in the library. "I have a proposal for you," Edward said finally. "My private library contains hundreds of rare volumes that need care. Some are deteriorating. Others need specialized cataloging." He paused, studying her face. "I would like to hire you for a temporary residential position." Sophia felt a chill run down her spine. "Residential?" "Yes, the books cannot be transported. Many are too fragile. And the work would require months of dedication." Edward kept his eyes fixed on her. "You would stay in the guest house. You would have all the necessary tools, and I would pay you triple your current salary." The offer was both tempting and frightening. Sophia needed the money. Her mother required an expensive treatment that her insurance wouldn't cover. Besides, working with a private collection of that caliber would be an invaluable boost to her career. But there was something unsettling in the air, as if she were about to cross an invisible border. "I need to think about it," she said, her mouth feeling dry. "Naturally," Edward replied, taking a few steps back. "But I must warn you, I am not known for my patience. The offer is only valid until tomorrow." Sophia nodded, her gaze shifting to the shelves around them. It was then that she noticed something strange, an empty space between two books, the exact size of the codex she had just delivered. "How did you know I would be the one to restore this particular manuscript?" she asked, suddenly intrigued. "The request came directly to the Institute without my specific name." Edward looked at her with an enigmatic expression. "I researched your work. I saw the pieces you restored over the past 2 years. I knew immediately that only your hands would be capable of saving something so precious." There was something in the way he spoke that suggested hidden layers of meaning. Sophia felt simultaneously flattered and uneasy. "I don't know if I can accept," she said hesitantly. "I have commitments. My mother is ill." "Your mother with multiple sclerosis," he completed, causing Sophia to freeze. "Who needs an experimental treatment that costs approximately $90,000. Her treatment her insurance plan refuses to cover. The shock on her face was visible. "How do you know that?" "I know many things, Miss Hayes," Edward answered with a disturbing calm. "About people who interest me." Sophia took a step back, suddenly feeling vulnerable. "Why me? Why did you choose me?" Edward moved with a feline grace, walking to one of the nearest shelves. He pulled out an old-looking book and opened it carefully. From inside, he took out a black-and-white photograph. "Do you know this woman?" he asked, holding the photo out to Sophia. She took the image with trembling fingers. It was a young woman with features strikingly similar to her own. The same. Large, expressive eyes, the same facial shape. But her hair was straight, her gaze different. There was a hardness, an intensity that Sophia did not recognize in herself. "No," she answered honestly. "Who is she?" "Clara Middleton, a cataloguer who worked here a few years ago." Edward took back the photograph, looking at it with an unreadable expression. "You look remarkably like her." Sophia felt a shiver. "And where is she now?" Edward put the photo back in the book and returned it to the shelf with meticulous precision. "Clara is no longer with us. An accident 3 years ago." There was something in the way he pronounced those words that sounded like an alarm in Sophia's instincts. A lie? A half-truth? She couldn't discern it, but her body reacted with a tingle of warning. "I'm sorry," she said automatically. "Don't be," he replied, turning to face her again. "Clara made her choices, just as we all do." Thunder rumbled in the distance. A summer storm was approaching. The sound seemed to break the tension of the moment. "I should go," Sophia said, collecting her bag. "I need to catch the last bus back to Charleston." "My driver can take you," Edward offered. "I prefer public transport," she insisted, feeling an urgent need for distance. Edward stared at her for several seconds before nodding slightly. "As you wish. But regarding my proposal—" "I'll think about it," Sophia replied, heading for the library door. "Miss Hayes," Edward called, making her stop and turn. "Some people go their whole lives without ever truly seeing themselves in the mirror. They live as ghosts of themselves." He paused, his eyes piercing her like needles. "But you hunger to be seen. I can sense it in your every move." Sophia felt her face burn, not from shame, but from a strange sensation of having been exposed in her most intimate essence. "You don't know me," she replied, with the firmest voice she could muster. "Perhaps not," Edward agreed, a slight smile on his lips. "But I recognize hunger when I see it, and I know you will be back." On the way back to Charleston, squeezed into the crowded bus that traveled along the coastal highway, Sophia looked out the window as the storm broke. White Point had disappeared into the fog and rain, as if it had never existed, but Edward Graham's words remained vivid in her mind. "I know you will be back." Sophia closed her eyes, feeling the sway of the bus, the smell of rain and sea salt, the weight of the decision she had to make. Her mother, worsening by the day, the money they didn't have, the unique professional opportunity, and that enigmatic man who looked at her as if he could see through her layers of protection, straight to the core of her unacknowledged desires. When she arrived at the small apartment she shared with her mother in the Riverbend district, she had already made her decision. She was afraid, yes, but for the first time in a long time, she felt something stronger than fear, curiosity. Her mother was asleep under the effect of her medication. Sophia left a gentle kiss on her forehead and went to her room, where she opened her desk drawer and took out the card Edward Graham had discreetly slipped into her bag before she left. There was only a phone number, handwritten in an elegant, firm script. Sophia dialed. When she heard the deep voice on the other end of the line, she felt a chill she couldn't define as apprehension or excitement. "I accept your proposal," she said simply. The silence on the other end was brief but charged with meaning. "I knew you would," Edward finally replied. "I'll send a car to pick you up tomorrow at 9. Bring only the essentials. The rest I will provide." Sophia hung up without saying goodbye, feeling her heart hammer against her ribs. She looked at herself in the small vanity mirror, and for an instant had the impression of seeing someone else reflected, someone with her features, but with a different gaze. More intense, braver, or was it just what she wished to see? That night, she dreamed of endless corridors, doors that opened into other corridors, and a man who watched her from a distance but never came closer. When she woke up in the middle of the night, she was sweaty and breathless, with a disturbing certainty. By accepting Edward Graham's proposal, She had sealed some kind of pact whose terms she did not yet know. But it was too late to turn back. And deep down she knew she didn't want to. Some part of her, perhaps the truest part, was tired of being invisible. It longed to be seen, even if it meant exposing herself to danger. The morning came too quickly. Sophia packed a small suitcase with simple clothes, her basic restoration materials, a few books and a portrait of her mother. She explained to Mrs. Hayes that she had gotten a temporary job that would pay for the treatment. She omitted the unsettling details. She promised to visit whenever she could. She cried as she hugged her, but remained firm in her decision. At 9 o'clock sharp, a black limousine pulled up in front of the modest building where she lived. The driver, a silent, middle-aged man, opened the back door without a word. Sophia got in, feeling out of place in the vehicle's luxury. As the car pulled away from the city toward the coast, she looked out the window, watching Charleston shrink on the horizon. She was leaving behind everything she knew, heading toward a man she barely knew, but who seemed to know her deeply. The feeling was like free-falling, terrifying and at the same time, strangely liberating. When the limousine began to climb the winding road that led to White Point, Sophia closed her eyes for a moment, letting her body sway gently with the curves. She felt for the first time in years that she was truly alive. The danger and the promise of something new had awakened something dormant within her. The car stopped. The door opened. And there was Edward Graham, standing on the stone steps of the entrance, with the turbulent sea behind him like a dramatic backdrop. He wore an impeccable light-colored suit that contrasted with his tanned skin. He looked as if he had been waiting for her for a long time, not just that morning, but her entire life. "Welcome to White Point, Miss Hayes," he said, a faint smile on his lips, extending his hand to her for the first time. Sophia hesitated for only a second before accepting the gesture. His hand was warm and firm, enveloping hers completely. The touch sent an electric current through her body. "I hope I don't regret this," she replied, holding his gaze. Edward's smile widened slightly, revealing a row of perfect white teeth. "Regret is a luxury few people can afford, Miss Hayes," he said, leading her into the mansion. "Life is made of irreversible choices. The question is, are we willing to accept their consequences?" The rosewood door closed behind them with a heavy, definitive sound. Sophia felt in that moment that she had crossed a point of no return. What she didn't know yet was whether it meant her salvation or her ruin. The guest house was, in fact, an entire wing of the main mansion, 3 bedrooms, a living room, a bathroom with a Victorian bathtub, and a small veranda overlooking the sea. Everything was decorated with an understated luxury that contrasted with the simplicity Sophia was used to. As she arranged her few clothes in the immense mahogany wardrobe, she felt like an intruder in a world that did not belong to her. There were fresh flowers on the dresser, white orchids in a Chinese porcelain vase. A handwritten card accompanied them, "To make you feel at home, E.G." Sophia smiled ironically. Nothing in this place made her feel at home. Everything here was strange, grand, suffocating in its perfection. The whitewashed walls, the antique furniture, the paintings of 19th century low-country landscapes, the Portuguese lace curtains that filtered the sunlight, everything seemed to exist in a different time than her own. In the first few weeks, Sophia rarely saw Edward Graham. He left instructions with the housekeeper, Mrs. Carman, an African-American woman of indefinable age, whose eyes seemed to carry centuries of secrets. The private library was in the east wing of the mansion, an imposing hall with a view of the sea, where piles of rare books awaited her care. The work was fascinating. Sophia lost herself among volumes of colonial literature, Jesuit manuscripts, the diaries of English navigators, love letters from traditional Charleston families. Many were in an alarming state of deterioration, affected by the sea's humidity, by insects, by the simple passage of time. She catalogued, cleaned, restored, always with the meticulousness that had made her respected in her profession. Sometimes she felt eyes on her. She would turn around quickly, only to find the space empty. Other times, she would hear footsteps on the other side of the door which would recede before she could open it. She was being watched, of that she was certain. Dinners were served promptly at 8 o'clock in the immense dining room overlooking the sea. The first few nights Sophia ate alone, accompanied only by the sound of the waves and the clinking of silver cutlery against French porcelain. On the fourth night, as dessert was being served, a perfect crème brûlée that melted in her mouth, Edward appeared. "Forgive my delay," he said, sitting at the head of the table. He wore an impeccable dark suit, as if he had just come from a formal engagement. Business in Charleston. Sophia nodded, not knowing what to say. His presence filled the room, suddenly making the space feel smaller. "How is the work in the library?" Edward asked as the butler served him red wine. "Progressing well," Sophia replied, maintaining a professional tone. "But there is much to do. Some volumes will require specialized treatment." Edward watched her over the rim of his wineglass, his dark eyes, reflecting the candlelight. "And how are you adjusting to the house?" "It's different from anything I know," she answered honestly. A faint smile curved his lips. "Different doesn't necessarily mean bad, does it?" "No," Sophia agreed. "Just strange." "Strange," Edward repeated as if savoring the word. "Yes, I suppose White Point might seem strange to someone accustomed to the city's rhythm. This house has its own cadence, its own pulse." He paused, taking a sip of wine. "How is your mother?" The abrupt change of subject caught Sophia off guard. "Stable. The doctors started the new treatment. I appreciate the advance you gave me." Edward dismissed the thanks with a wave of his hand. "Money is just a means. Miss Hayes, what matters is the end it serves." There was a silence, filled only by the distant sound of the sea and the soft crackling of the candles. "Why do you collect these books?" Sophia finally asked. "Some are valuable, yes, but others seem personal, intimate." Edward's gaze intensified. "I believe that books hold more than words, Miss Hayes. They hold souls, the fingerprints of those who touched them, the tears of those who read them, the sighs of those who loved them." He leaned forward slightly. "When you touch a book that someone was reading 200 years ago, you are touching that person. It's the closest thing to immortality we know." There was a passion in his voice that Sophia had never heard before. "And the woman in the photograph?" "Clara," Sophia ventured. "Did she share this interest?" Edward's face hardened instantly. He set down his glass with an abrupt movement, spilling a few drops of wine on the white linen tablecloth. "Clara is not a topic for dinner," he replied coldly. Sophia felt she had crossed an invisible line. The silence that followed was oppressive. "I apologize," she murmured finally. Edward took a deep breath, seeming to recalibrate his emotions with a visible effort. "No, I apologize. I shouldn't be so abrupt." He stood up, smoothing his suit. "I have work to do. Good night, Miss Hayes." And he left, leaving her alone with her thoughts and unanswered questions. Days turned into weeks. Sophia fell into a routine of working in the library during the day and occasional dinners with Edward at night. Gradually, the conversations became less tense, more fluid. He began to share stories of his travels around the world in search of rare books, about the history of the Graham family, about the secrets of White Point Mansion, built, according to him, by an ancestor who had made a fortune in the slave trade and tried to atone for his sins by turning the house into a refuge for artists and intellectuals in the early 19th century. "Guilt is hereditary. Miss Hayes," he commented one evening as they walked along the private beach below the mansion, "we carry the sins of our ancestors in our blood." "I disagree," Sophia replied, feeling increasingly comfortable challenging him. "Everyone is responsible for their own choices." "You say that because your family doesn't have a legacy of blood and power," he countered, with a melancholic smile. "It's easier to judge when you're on the outside of history." Something in the way he spoke bothered her deeply. "I'm not judging anyone," Sophia said. "I just believe we can choose who we want to be regardless of our origins." Edward stopped walking and turned to face her. The full moonlight illuminated his face, highlighting the strong angles of his jaw, the intensity of his eyes. "And who do you choose to be, Sophia?" It was the first time he had called her by her first name. The sound of her name in his voice sent a shiver down her spine. "Someone who isn't afraid of the truth," she replied, holding his gaze. Edward smiled, a genuine smile that completely transformed his face, softening his features. "A dangerous choice," he commented, resuming his walk. "The truth is rarely comforting." That night in her room, Sophia couldn't sleep. Edward's words echoed in her mind, and more disturbing than the words was the feeling growing inside her, an undeniable attraction to this complex and enigmatic man, with his secrets and his shadows. It was during a particularly violent storm, a month after her arrival, that Sophia found the first clue about Clara Middleton. The power had gone out across the entire property. The emergency generators only worked in essential areas. Sophia was in her room, reading by candlelight, when she heard a strange noise coming from one of the walls, a creak followed by a dull thud, as if something had fallen in a hidden space. Driven by curiosity, Sophia examined the wall carefully. There was a wooden panel that seemed slightly misaligned. She pressed it with her hands, and to her surprise it gave way, revealing a small compartment built into the wall. Inside was a carved wooden box. Sophia hesitated. She was invading Edward's privacy. But something stronger than her conscience compelled her to continue. She opened the box. Inside, she found a diary bound in red leather. On the first page, in an elegant female hand, Clara Middleton, 2018-2020. Sophia's heart raced. She quickly flipped through the diary, finding accounts of daily life in the mansion, personal thoughts, and gradually mentions of Edward Graham that evolved from professional admiration to personal intimacy. Clara had been hired, just like her, to catalogue part of the library. And like her, she had been seduced by Edward's mystery. In an entry dated March 2019, Clara wrote, "Edward kissed me today, finally." It was in the library among the books of Baroque poetry. His hands were shaking, and that surprised me. Him, always so controlled, so confident. He said he fought against what he felt for me, that he tried to keep his distance, but that I am like a magnet to him, an inexplicable force that pulls him closer. I feel drunk with power and fear. Sophia continued to read, feeling like an intruder not only in the physical space of White Point, but in the lives of Edward and Clara. The entries became more disturbing as she progressed through the diary. Clara described an intense, passionate relationship, but one that was increasingly controlling. Edward monitored her movements, chose her clothes, defined who she could speak to. In another entry from November 2019, "I found cameras in my room. In the bathroom. I confronted Edward. He didn't deny it. He said he needs to protect me from myself, that I'm too impulsive, too self-destructive, that only he knows what's best for me. Part of me wants to run. Another part, the scariest part, feels perversely flattered by this obsession." The last entry was from January 2020. "I can't take it anymore. The medication he insists I take leaves me lethargic, confused. He says it's for my anxiety, but I suspect there's something more. I'm having memory lapses. Whole hours disappear. When I question him, he says I imagined things, that I'm getting worse, that I need to trust him. But I don't trust him anymore. I have to get out of here. Tomorrow, while he's in Charleston, I'm going to run. I'll go to Mariana's house on Hilton Head Island. Edward doesn't know about her. I'll be safe there. I just need to—" The entry ended abruptly, as if Clara had been interrupted. There was nothing else written in the diary. Sophia closed the book, her hands trembling. The storm outside intensified, with thunder that made the house shake on its foundations. What had happened to Clara? Had she managed to escape? Or had Edward stopped her? A noise at the door startled her. Quickly, she put the diary back in the box and pushed the panel to close it. The bedroom door opened, revealing Edward holding a candelabra with lit candles. The flickering light created unsettling shadows on his face. "Is everything all right?" he asked, entering the room without waiting for an invitation. "The storm is strong." "I'm fine," Sophia replied, hoping the guilt wasn't written all over her face. "I just don't like storms." Edward approached, placing the candelabra on the bedside table. For a terrible moment, Sophia thought he would look at the wall, that he would notice the slightly misaligned panel. But his attention was entirely focused on her. "Storms are purifying," he said, sitting on the edge of the bed. Sophia felt the mattress dip under his weight. "They wash everything away. They renew the world." His proximity made Sophia's heart race, but now there was a new element to her reaction, fear. What had he done to Clara? "You look pale," Edward observed, reaching out to touch her face. Sophia flinched instinctively. Edward frowned, a shadow of hurt crossing his eyes. "You're still afraid of me," he stated, lowering his hand. "It's not fear," Sophia lied. "It's just, I'm not used to being touched," he completed with a surprising gentleness in his voice. "I know, I can see it in you, Sophia. The way you shrink when someone gets too close. How you maintain physical distance even when you are emotionally close. The accuracy of the observation unnerved her. It was true. Since her childhood, marked by physical punishments disguised as spiritual discipline, Sophia had avoided physical contact. Her body was a closed territory, protected by invisible walls. "You don't know me as well as you think," she challenged, trying to regain her emotional balance. Edward smiled, that enigmatic smile that never quite reached his eyes. "On the contrary, I know you better than you know yourself." A particularly loud clap of thunder shook the house. The candlelight flickered. Sophia flinched involuntarily. "You really are scared," Edward observed, and there was genuine concern in his voice. In that moment, something broke inside Sophia, not from fear, but from exhaustion. She was tired of feigning strength, of keeping her distance, of living confined within herself. "I'm afraid of many things," she admitted, her voice almost inaudible. "Of the dark, of enclosed spaces, of trusting people." Edward watched her in silence for several seconds. When he spoke, his voice was laden with an emotion Sophia couldn't identify. "We are more alike than you imagine, Sophia. I too have lived surrounded by walls." Another clap of thunder, closer this time. Sophia shivered. Edward, in a surprisingly gentle gesture, took one of the blankets folded at the foot of the bed and wrapped it around her shoulders. "Tell me about your fears," he asked, maintaining a respectful distance now. "Perhaps if you name them, they will lose some of their power." And inexplicably, Sophia began to talk about her childhood in a fundamentalist evangelical community in the Low Country, about her widowed mother, who clung to religion as a lifeline, about the aunts who punished her for impure thoughts, locking her in dark rooms to reflect on her sins, about how she had learned to live inside her own mind, where no one could reach her. Edward listened without interrupting. His eyes, normally piercing and analytical, were softened by something that looked like genuine understanding. "The darkness," he said when Sophia finished her story. "That's why you restore books, to preserve the light of knowledge against the darkness of ignorance." The observation was so accurate, so profoundly true, that Sophia felt unexpected tears well up in her eyes. She had never articulated this connection to herself, but Edward had seen it instantly. "Yes," she whispered. The storm seemed to be moving away. The thunder grew more distant. The rain, however, continued heavily, tapping against the windows like impatient little fingers. "You should try to sleep," Edward suggested, getting up. "Tomorrow is another day." He picked up the candelabra and went to the door. On the threshold he stopped and turned. "Sophia," he called softly, "thank you for your trust. I know how much it cost you to share that with me." She nodded, not trusting her own voice. "Good night," he said, and then, almost as a whisper, "Sweet dreams." The door closed. Sophia sat on the bed, wrapped in the blanket, smelling his scent that had lingered on the fabric. Sandalwood, leather, a touch of something darker and indefinable. She felt strangely exposed and at the same time relieved, as if she had opened an old wound and finally allowed the air to touch it. The next day the sun shone brightly, as if the storm had never happened. Sophia woke up late, exhausted from the night of confidences and disturbing discoveries. When she arrived at the library to work, she found a small package on her desk. Inside was an old book of poetry, a first edition by a celebrated Carolinian abolitionist poet. A silk bookmark indicated a specific poem, "The Slave Ship," and there was a note, in Edward's elegant handwriting. "To remind you that, even in the deepest darkness of human history, there have always been voices that rose up against cruelty, like yours last night, rising up against the darkness of your own past. With admiration, e.g." Sophia sat down, feeling a complex emotion wash over her. The gesture was of a surprising sensitivity. It showed a side of Edward that contradicted the dark suspicions Clara's diary had planted in her mind. What if Clara was wrong? What if she had misinterpreted Edward's actions? Or worse, what if Sophia was letting herself be ensnared by the same dangerous charm that had captured Clara, ignoring the warning signs the other woman had left like breadcrumbs in a dark fairy tale? The following weeks were a whirlwind of contradictory emotions. On one hand, Sophia continued her meticulous work in the library, discovering literary treasures that fascinated her. On the other, she couldn't stop thinking about Clara's diary, about the disturbing implications of her disappearance. Edward became more present. They dined together almost every night now. He took her for walks around the property, showing her the elaborate gardens, the small grove of native trees, the abandoned chapel where his ancestors had prayed for redemption. He shared stories of his childhood, his mother who died in childbirth, his distant and cruel father, his younger sister, who had been his only comfort until the tragic fire. "It was my fault," he confessed one afternoon as they watched the sea from the main veranda. "Beatrice asked to play with my matches. I said no, but I left them where she could reach them. She was only 7. She didn't understand the danger." His voice broke. "By the time I realized what was happening, it was too late. Her room was in flames. I tried to save her, but..." He held out his arms, showing old scars that marked his skin. "My father blamed me. He never said it explicitly, but it was in his eyes every time he looked at me. You survived and she didn't." That was the silent accusation he carried until the day he died. Sophia felt a wave of compassion. The story explained so much about Edward. His obsession with control, his isolation, the aura of guilt that seemed to envelop him like a second skin. "You were a child," she said softly. "You couldn't have predicted what would happen." Edward turned to her, his eyes shining with a disturbing intensity. "Is that what you really believe? That we are not responsible for the consequences of our actions, even when we don't foresee them?" "That's not what I said," Sophia corrected, holding his gaze. "I just believe there's a difference between responsibility and guilt. You can accept responsibility for what happened without torturing yourself with guilt for the rest of your life." Edward watched her for a long moment, as if seeing her in a new light. "You are surprising, Sophia Hayes," he said finally. "You have a wisdom that belies your youth." "It's not wisdom," she replied, "just survival. I've learned to distinguish between what I can change and what I must accept." That night during dinner, Edward served champagne. It was the first time they had drunk anything other than the red wine that usually accompanied their meals. "A celebration?" Sophia asked, curious. "Yes," he replied, raising his glass. 2 months since your arrival. The library has never been in better hands." They toasted. The champagne was sweet and effervescent, leaving a trail of warmth in Sophia's throat. "I found something interesting today," Edward said, after a few moments of comfortable silence. "A manuscript I thought I had lost years ago." He took a small bundle of aged papers from his inner jacket pocket. "It's a poem, written by my great-great-grandfather for a slave woman he fell in love with. An impossible love, of course, in those times. But he documented his feelings nonetheless." He handed the papers to Sophia, who took them with the care she dedicated to all old documents. The handwriting was elaborate, difficult to decipher, but the words she could read were of a disconcerting passion. "Your body is my salvation and my ruin. When night comes, I see only your eyes shining in the darkness. I know I have no right to love you, that the conventions and laws of men separate us, but the heart knows no laws but its own." Sophia looked up from the manuscript, meeting Edward's intense gaze. "It's moving," she said, her throat suddenly dry. "Moving," Edward repeated with a faint smile. "It's tragic. He loved her, but he could never publicly acknowledge that love. She died in childbirth, giving birth to a child he officially recognized as daughter of an unknown mother. He never remarried. He lived the rest of his life here in this house, surrounded by portraits of her that he had secretly commissioned from memory." Sophia handed back the manuscript, feeling a weight in her chest. The story echoed her own situation in a disturbing way, the growing attraction to Edward, despite all the internal warnings, all the signs of danger. "Why are you showing me this?" she asked directly. Edward put the manuscript away carefully. "Because I want you to understand the nature of this house, of my family. We are capable of great passions, great follies." He paused, his eyes never leaving hers. "And great destruction." The frankness of the statement left Sophia breathless. "Is that a warning?" "It's a confession," he replied, reaching across the table to lightly touch her fingers. It was the first time he had deliberately touched her since the handshake on the day of her arrival. "I am drawn to you, Sophia, in a way I haven't been in a very long time." His touch was warm, electric. Sophia felt a tremor run through her entire body. "You barely know me," she whispered. "On the contrary," Edward countered, his fingers gently caressing hers. I know you through your literary tastes, the way you restore a damaged book, how your eyebrows furrow when you're concentrating. I know the sound of your footsteps in the hall, the scent of your perfume that lingers for hours after you've left a room. His voice dropped to a whisper. And above all, I know your hunger. The same hunger I have. Sophia knew she should pull her hand away, stand up, remember Clara's diary, the warnings, the signs of danger. But her body seemed to have a will of its own. What hunger? She asked, her voice almost inaudible. Edward's thumb made small circles on her palm, sending waves of heat up her arm, into her chest, her belly. The hunger to be truly seen, he answered. To be recognized not for what others expect or demand, but for who we really are. His gaze was hypnotic. You've spent your whole life hidden, Sophia. First by your family, then by your own choice. You keep people at a distance, because you fear that if you let them get too close, they'll see your darkest parts, your desires, your angers, your small cruelties. Every word struck Sophia like a precise arrow. How could he know? How could he see her with such clarity? And you? She managed to ask, her breath catching. Do you hide too? Yes, Edward admitted without hesitation, but not from you. Not anymore. The world around them seemed to have disappeared. There was only the table between them, the half-empty, champagne glasses, their intertwined hands and a tension so palpable that Sophia could almost see it in the air, like invisible threads connecting them. I'm scared, she confessed, surprising herself with her honesty. Edward's smile was soft, understanding. So am I, he replied. Fear is what keeps us alive, Sophia. It's what tells us that something truly matters. Slowly he stood and walked around the table without letting go of her hand. He stopped beside her, looking down at her. Sophia remained seated, feeling simultaneously small and powerful under his gaze. May I kiss you? Edward asked, his voice hoarse with restrained desire. Sophia knew this was the decisive moment, the point of no return. After this, nothing would be the same. She remembered Clara's diary, the disturbing words, the mystery of her disappearance, but she also remembered her own life, the years lost in fear and seclusion, the feeling of never having truly lived, only existed. Yes, she whispered finally. Edward leaned in slowly as if giving her time to change her mind. His lips touched hers with surprising delicacy, a light, almost reverent touch. Sophia closed her eyes, feeling his warmth envelop her like a wave. The kiss deepened gradually. Edward's hands found her face, holding it as if it was something infinitely precious. Sophia let herself be carried away by the sensation, by the vertigo of finally allowing herself to feel completely, without reservations, without walls. When they parted, they were both breathless. Edward rested his forehead against hers, his eyes still closed, as if trying to absorb every sensation. Sophia, he murmured, her name a prayer on his lips. She opened her eyes, finding his already open, watching her with an intensity that made her tremble. I don't know what I'm doing, she confessed, feeling vulnerable and exposed. Nobody does, he replied, brushing a lock of hair from her face with infinite tenderness, especially when it comes to this. This? Real connection, Edward explained. It's always a leap in the dark. They stayed like that for a few moments, breathing the same air, absorbing each other's presence. Sophia felt her heart beating so hard, she was sure he could hear it. It's late, Edward said finally, pulling back slightly. You should rest. A pang of disappointment shot through Sophia. Part of her had expected. What? For him to carry her to her room, for them to consummate the attraction pulsing between them right there. Yes, she agreed, trying to hide her disappointment. I have a lot of work tomorrow. Edward smiled as if he could read her thoughts. It's not rejection, Sophia, it's respect. He touched her face lightly. If it happens between us, I want it to be because we are both absolutely sure. No doubts, no reservations. The consideration touched her deeply. It was so different from the possessive, controlling image Clara had painted in her diary. Thank you, she murmured, standing up. Edward walked her to the dining room door. There he took her hand and brought it to his lips, placing a soft kiss on her fingers. "Sleep well," he said, releasing her reluctantly. Sophia walked down the corridor to her room, feeling as if she were floating. She knew she was entering dangerous territory. She knew there were unresolved mysteries, shadows lurking, but for the first time in her life, desire outweighed fear. In her room, as she prepared for bed, she noticed something on her bedside table, a small book bound in blue leather. She didn't recognize it. It hadn't been there when she left for dinner. She opened it curious. It was a blank diary. On the first page, in Edward's handwriting, "To record your own thoughts, fears and desires, so that you never have to hide who you really are. E.G." Sophia touched the words with her fingertips, feeling an inexplicable emotion take hold of her. The gesture was intimate, significant, an invitation to authenticity. It was then that she noticed something on the floor near the bedside table. She bent down to pick it up, a small piece of paper folded several times. She unfolded it, finding a hurried and shaky female handwriting, different from Edward's, different, too, from the elegant script in Clara's diary. "He will destroy you as he tried to destroy me." The face in the portrait, the key in the clock, the truth at the clinic. "Find Mariana on Hilton Head Island. Run while you can." There was no signature. Sophia sat on the bed, feeling the blood run cold in her veins. The note confirmed her worst suspicions, contradicting everything she had felt in the last moments with Edward. Had the message been placed there while they were at dinner? By whom? Was someone in the house trying to warn her? The image of Edward, his eyes burning with sincerity as he kissed her hand, contrasted violently with the words of warning on the paper. Sophia didn't know who or what to believe. She tucked the note inside the new diary and hid it under the mattress. She spent hours lying in the darkness, mentally replaying every moment, every word, every gesture since her arrival at White Point. Who was Edward Graham, really? A man tormented by past tragedies, capable of great sensitivity and understanding, or a manipulative predator who ensnared vulnerable women in his web of lies and control? And more disturbingly, who was Sophia? Hayes now? The competent, reserved restorer she had always been? Or this new version of herself, willing to risk everything, safety, sanity, perhaps her very life, for a man she barely knew? When sleep finally found her, in the early hours of the morning, Sophia dreamed of endless corridors, doors that opened to reveal other doors, and the face of a woman who looked terrifyingly like her, screaming without a sound behind a glass she couldn't break. The next morning, Sophia woke with a firm resolution. She needed to find out the truth about Clara Middleton. The mysterious note had mentioned the key in the clock and the portrait. If these clues existed, she would find them. Edward had left for Charleston early, an unavoidable business meeting, according to Mrs. Carman. His absence gave Sophia a few hours of freedom to explore. She started in the library, systematically searching for portraits. There were several paintings on the walls, low country landscapes, historical scenes, portraits of Graham family ancestors, but nothing that resembled Clara or Sophia. It was in Edward's private office, a room adjacent to the library that she rarely visited, that she found the first clue. A small painting turned to face the wall, as if deliberately hidden. Sophia turned it around. The shock almost made her drop the frame. It was an oil portrait of a woman who looked strikingly similar to her, the same large, expressive eyes, the same oval face, the same full mouth. But there were subtle differences. The hair was straighter, the gaze harder, the posture more rigid. At the base of the frame, a small golden plaque. Clara, 2019. Sophia placed the portrait on Edward's desk, studying it intently. The resemblance was disturbing. Was it a coincidence? Or had Edward deliberately sought her out because of her likeness to Clara? The idea made her shiver. The second part of the note mentioned the key in the clock. Sophia scanned the room carefully. There was an old clock on the mantelpiece, an English grandfather clock, probably from the 19th century. She approached it hesitantly. The mechanism ticked softly. Sophia opened the glass door that protected the pendulum and examined the interior. Nothing. Frustrated, she was about to give up when she noticed something odd at the base of the clock, a small drawer that seemed part of the design, but on closer inspection looked like it could be opened. She pulled it carefully. Inside she found an old key, not a modern door key but a heavy iron key, the kind used in colonial buildings. Next to it, a laminated card, Serene Mind Clinic, Visitor. The third part of the note now made sense. The truth at the clinic. Sophia put the key and the card in her pocket. She needed to find out where this clinic was and what had happened to Clara. She returned to her room and used the laptop she had brought to search for the Serene Mind Clinic. It was a private, psychiatric institution on the outskirts of Charleston, known for treating wealthy patients with substance abuse problems and severe mental disorders. Sophia's stomach sank. Was it possible that Clara was a patient there, that Edward had committed her against her will? The idea seemed absurd, too cinematic to be real, but the evidence pointed in that direction. The last part of the note mentioned Mariana on Hilton Head Island. Sophia didn't know any Mariana, but Clara's diary had mentioned a friend with that name. If she could find her, perhaps she could learn more about what had really happened. Sophia spent the rest of the morning researching. She found out that Hilton Head Island was a few hours' drive from Charleston. She could go there, but she would need an excuse to be away from White Point for at least 2 days. And more importantly, she would need Mariana's full name to find her. She went back to the library, determined to find more information. She remembered that Edward kept a collection of books on modern American art that she had not yet catalogued. She began to examine the shelf dedicated to them, looking for anything that might be hidden between the pages. In the third book she opened, a monograph on Georgia O'Keeffe. She found a photograph tucked between the pages. It showed 2 smiling women on a beach. One was clearly Clara, the other unknown to Sophia. Turning the photo over, she read the inscription on the back. Myanmar, Mirror Beach, 2018. Best times. Mari, probably the Mariana mentioned in the note. But she still didn't have a last name. Sophia continued her methodical search book by book. It was in the last volume on the shelf, a biography of Lee Krasner, that she found something even more valuable. A small envelope containing a business card. Mariana Cole, Horizon Gallery, Hilton Head Island. SC? There was an address and a phone number. Sophia felt a wave of triumph. Now she had something concrete. The sound of the front door opening interrupted her thoughts. Edward had returned. Quickly, Sophia put the business card in her pocket and replaced the books, trying to leave everything exactly as it was. When Edward entered the library, she was sitting at her work table, seemingly engrossed in cataloguing a set of old maps. "Good morning," he said, approaching. His smile was warm, his eyes bright. "Did you miss me?" Sophia forced a smile, hoping her nervousness wasn't evident. "I was busy," she replied, gesturing to the maps. Edward leaned in and kissed her forehead gently. "I have a surprise for you," he announced. "Her gift." Sophia's heart raced, but not with anticipation, with apprehension. "What kind of gift?" "It's better to show than to tell," he replied, extending his hand. "Shall we?" Sophia hesitated for just a moment before taking his hand. What else could she do? She had to keep up appearances until she found out the truth. Edward led her down the main corridor to the entrance hall, where a large box sat on a side table. It was a simple cardboard box with no wrapping or decoration. "Open it," he encouraged. Sophia approached cautiously. She opened the box, revealing its contents: high-quality restoration materials, brushes imported from Italy, special glue for old documents, Japanese paper for mending, precision instruments in stainless steel. "They're wonderful," she said, genuinely surprised and touched by the thoughtfulness. It was exactly the kind of equipment she dreamed of, but could never afford on her own. "Only the best for the best restorer in the country," Edward commented, obviously pleased with her reaction. Sophia looked at him, confused. How could she reconcile this thoughtful, generous man with the possible villain who was keeping a woman institutionalized against her will? How could she align the Edward who had kissed her so tenderly the night before with the obsessive manipulator described in Clara's diary? "Thank you," she said finally. "That's very kind of you. "It's not kindness," Edward replied, lightly touching her face. "It's recognition. You deserve the right tools for your talent." Sophia nodded, unable to articulate a coherent response. Every touch from him now was laden with doubt and suspicion, yet her body still reacted with a disturbing intensity. "There's something else," Edward continued. "I've booked a table at the best restaurant in Charleston for tonight. I thought we could have a special dinner to celebrate." "Celebrate what?" His gaze became more intense, more intimate. "Us," he replied simply. "What's beginning between us?" Sophia felt a lump in her throat. She needed time. She needed space to think, to investigate. "Edward, I know it's all very fast," he interrupted with an understanding smile. "But life is too short for hesitation, don't you think?" Before she could answer, Edward checked his watch. "I have a video conference in 5 minutes. Shall we talk later?" He kissed her briefly on the lips. "The car will be here at 7, and he left, leaving her alone with her gifts and her doubts. Sophia spent the next few hours in a state of inner turmoil. She had to make a decision. She could pretend to accept the dinner invitation, keep up appearances, and continue her investigation discreetly. Or she could confront Edward directly, demand answers about Clara. There was also a third option: run. Pack her things and just leave, perhaps for Hilton Head Island, to find Mariana Cole. But what about her mother? The treatment that depended on Edward's money. And the work in the library, which she genuinely loved. Around 6 o'clock, she made a decision. She would go to dinner. She would use the opportunity to observe Edward in a public setting, to try to learn more about his behavior, his intentions. And then, depending on what she felt, she would decide her next steps. She dressed carefully, choosing a simple but elegant dress she had brought, one of the few formal items in her modest wardrobe. As she brushed her hair, she looked at her reflection in the mirror, thinking of Clara, of the disturbing resemblance between them. What did that resemblance mean to Edward? Was it just a coincidence or something more sinister? At 7 o'clock sharp, the car arrived. To Sophia's surprise, Edward was not in it. "Mr. Graham asked me to pick you up, miss," the driver explained. "So he will meet you at the restaurant." The drive to Charleston took almost an hour. Sophia used the time to organize her thoughts, plan her questions, and prepare herself for any revelation. The restaurant was as elegant as Edward had promised, an exclusive establishment in the historic French Quarter, occupying a meticulously restored colonial mansion. A maître d' greeted her and led her to a table on a private terrace overlooking the Charleston harbor. Edward was already there, standing, impeccable, in a dark grey suit. His face lit up when he saw her. "You look stunning," he said, kissing her lightly on the cheek. Sophia thanked him, feeling both drawn to and alarmed by the growing intimacy between them. They sat down. A waiter appeared immediately to serve champagne. "A toast," Edward proposed, raising his glass. "To new beginnings." Sophia touched her glass to his, keeping her eyes fixed on his face. "To truths revealed," she replied, in a tone that could be interpreted as playful or challenging, depending on how Edward chose to understand it. A slight furrowing of his brow indicated he had caught the ambiguity. "Truths?" he repeated, smiling slightly. "You seem concerned with truths lately." "I've always been concerned with truths," Sophia replied, deciding it was time to be direct. "Especially when I feel I'm not getting all of them." Edward's smile vanished, replaced by a more serious expression. "What are you talking about exactly, Sophia?" This was the moment of decision. Sophia took a deep breath. "Clara Middleton," she said simply, watching his reaction closely. Edward was very still for a few seconds. His eyes, normally warm, became cold and calculating. "What about her?" "I want to know what happened." "The truth, Edward. Not the version you tell everyone else." He took a sip of champagne, never taking his eyes off her. "Clara had a nervous breakdown," he finally replied. "She became unstable, dangerous to herself and others. And then? So I had her committed to a specialized clinic. For her own good." His voice was soft, but there was an underlying hardness. "She is receiving the best possible care." "Against her will," Sophia added, not as a question but as a statement. Edward leaned forward, his voice dropping to an intense whisper. "You don't understand, Sophia. Clara was in no condition to make decisions. She was delusional, paranoid. She believed I was trying to poison her." He paused, his eyes never leaving hers. I loved her. I only wanted to protect her. Loved? Sophia repeated. Past tense? A flash of pain crossed Edward's face. What I felt for her died when I realized she would never trust me, that she saw monsters where there was only a man trying to help. Sophia felt a chill. The explanation was plausible, even understandable. But something in the way Edward spoke, with that controlled calm, that clinical precision, disturbed her deeply. Why didn't you tell me this before? She asked. Why the mystery? And how exactly was I supposed to bring that up? His voice now had a touch of irritation. Over dinner. By the way, Sophia, my ex-girlfriend had a psychotic break and is in an institution. Would that have been appropriate? Sophia didn't back down. More appropriate than hiding the truth, especially considering how much I look like her. Edward was silent for several seconds, studying her face. The physical resemblance is undeniable, he finally admitted. But you are not Clara, you never were. Then what am I to you, Edward? The question came out more vulnerable than she intended. He reached across the table, touching her fingers lightly. A second chance, he replied, with a sincerity that seemed genuine. A chance to do things differently this time. Sophia felt torn. Part of her wanted to believe him, the pain in his eyes when he spoke of Clara, the apparent honesty in his words now. Another part remembered the diary, the mysterious note, the warnings. I want to believe you, she said finally. But you don't, he completed, withdrawing his hand. It wasn't an accusation, just a statement of fact. I have doubts, Sophia admitted. Questions? Then ask. Edward leaned back in his chair. I'm an open book. Sophia hesitated, reorganizing her thoughts. Is Clara really at the Serene Mind Clinic? Edward raised his eyebrows, clearly surprised that she knew the name. Yes, he confirmed after a moment. How did you find out? Sophia ignored the question. Do you visit her? Regularly. Every 2 weeks. Has she improved? A heavy sigh escaped Edward. She has good days and bad days. The doctors are cautiously optimistic. He paused. She asks about you, you know. Sophia froze. What? Not you specifically, of course. She doesn't know you. Edward took another sip of champagne. But she talks about the replacement, about how I replaced her. It's part of her delusion. A shiver ran down Sophia's spine. Was this before or after you met me? Edward's gaze became penetrating. Before. Months before. He leaned forward. That's what's bothering you, isn't it? You think I sought you out because of your resemblance to Clara? The thought crossed my mind, Sophia admitted. It wasn't like that, Edward assured her. I learned of your work. I was impressed. I needed a restorer for my library. The resemblance was a surprising coincidence, he paused. Or fate, depending on how you look at life. The waiter approached to take their orders. Edward ordered for both of them in fluent French, something Sophia hadn't known he spoke. Another small mystery, another unknown facet. When they were alone again, Sophia decided to change her approach. I want to visit Clara, she announced. Edward became very still, his face an impenetrable mask. Why? Because I need to see for myself. To hear what she has to say. She won't say anything coherent, Edward warned. She's lost in her own world now. Still, Sophia insisted, if we are to continue what we've started, I need that certainty. Edward studied her for a long moment as if gauging her determination. All right, he finally agreed. I can arrange a visit for next week. As my guest. Sophia nodded, feeling a small victory. It was more than she had hoped for. Thank you, she said sincerely. The dinner proceeded in a lighter atmosphere. Edward told stories of his travels around the world in search of rare books. Sophia spoke of her dream of opening a small restoration studio in Charleston. They laughed, shared childhood memories, discussed literature. For a few hours, Sophia almost forgot her suspicions, her doubts. When dinner was over, Edward took her for a walk through the historic district. The night was warm, the sky starry, the cobblestone streets lit by old-fashioned lamps. In front of the old cathedral, he stopped and turned to her. I'm a complicated man, Sophia, he said, holding her hands. I have a past full of shadows, mistakes, regrets. But when I'm with you, his voice faltered slightly. It's as if those shadows recede. As if I can see a different path ahead. Sophia felt unexpected tears form in her eyes. There was so much sincerity in his voice, so much vulnerability in his gaze. I'm scared, she confessed. of losing myself, of waking up one day and not recognizing myself anymore. Edward touched her face gently. That will never happen, he promised. I won't let it. He kissed her then under the Charleston stars, in front of a centuries-old church that had witnessed countless promises over the ages, some kept, others broken. On the way back to White Point, in the luxurious comfort of the limousine, Sophia rested her head on Edward's shoulder, allowing herself just for that moment to believe that everything could end well, that his explanations were true, that Clara was truly ill, that there was no reason to be afraid. When they arrived at the mansion, Edward walked her to her bedroom door. He didn't try to come in, didn't press for more intimacy. He just kissed her softly and wished her good night. The gesture of respect touched her deeply. Sophia slept surprisingly well without nightmares or disturbances. When she woke the next morning, she felt refreshed, clearer. She made a decision. She would visit Clara first, as Edward had promised, and then, depending on what she discovered, she would find Mariana on Hilton Head Island. She needed all the facts before making a final judgment. The following days passed in an almost idyllic routine. Sophia continued her work in the library, now using the new materials Edward had given her. In the evenings, they dined together, talking about books, art, history. The intimacy between them grew, but Edward never crossed the boundaries Sophia silently established. He never pushed for more than gentle kisses and caresses. The promise to visit Clara was kept. The following Wednesday, Edward took her to the Serene Mind Clinic, a modern, elegant complex on the outskirts of Charleston, more like a luxury resort than a psychiatric institution. At the reception, they were greeted cordially. Edward was clearly known and respected there. A doctor, Dr. Mendez, came personally to meet them. Mr. Graham, a pleasure to see you again. He shook Edward's hand firmly, then turned to Sophia. And this must be your guest. My partner, Edward corrected, surprising Sophia with the formality of the term. Sophia Hayes. She's a restorer of rare books. The doctor nodded politely. A pleasure. Miss Hayes, Mr. Graham mentioned you wished to see patient 73 today. Clara, Edward said with a subtle firmness. Her name is Clara Middleton. The doctor seemed slightly uncomfortable. Yes, of course, Clara, she's stable today. Her good day for a visit. He led them through impeccably clean and well-lit corridors, explaining the modern treatments offered by the clinic, the innovative therapies, the holistic approach. Sophia listened attentively, looking for any sign of irregularity, any hint that the institution was not what it seemed. They reached a more private wing, with fewer patients around. The doctor stopped in front of a door and entered a code into an electronic panel. You'll have 15 minutes, he informed them. If there's any problem, use the emergency button next to the bed. The door opened, revealing a spacious and comfortable room, decorated in soft shades of blue. There were fresh flowers in a vase, books on a small shelf, a flat-screen television on the wall. The window, protected by bars elegantly disguised as decorative elements, offered a view of a well-tended garden. Sitting in an armchair near the window was Clara Middleton. Sophia's heart raced as she saw the face so similar to her own. Clara was thinner than in the photographs, with deep dark circles under her eyes and shorter hair, but the resemblance was still stunning. Clara, Edward called softly. The woman turned slowly. Her eyes, initially vacant, focused when she saw Edward. A fragile smile formed on her lips. You came, she said, her voice hoarse as if from disuse. I thought you had forgotten. I never forget, Edward replied, approaching to kiss her forehead fraternally. I brought someone to meet you. Clara turned her attention to Sophia. Her eyes widened slightly, then narrowed with suspicion. The replacement, she murmured, unintentionally confirming what Edward had said at the restaurant. You brought her to torture me. No one is going to torture you, Clara, Edward said patiently. This is Sophia. She's restoring the books in the library. Clara let out a bitter laugh. The books. Always the damned books. She turned to Sophia. Do you know what he does to the women who touch his books? He turns them into characters. He rewrites their stories until they don't recognize themselves anymore. Sophia felt a chill but maintained her composure. Hello, Clara, she said gently. It's a pleasure to meet you. Clara studied her intensely, her eyes scanning every inch of her face. You look like me, she observed, her voice now calmer, almost analytical. "But you're not like me. There's something different in your eyes." "What?" Sophia asked, intrigued in spite of herself. "Caution," Clara replied after a moment of reflection. "You watch before you dive in." I always dived in head first. Her eyes moved to Edward. "That's what he saw in you. The possibility of control." Edward sighed heavily. "Clara, don't start with those stories again. Sophia only came for a cordial visit." "Cordial," Clara repeated with an ironic smile. "Like your medication? Like your hidden cameras? Like your gifts that are really golden cages?" Sophia glanced quickly at Edward, whose expression remained impassive, though a vein pulsed at his temple. "Can I speak with her alone?" Sophia asked, surprising them both. Edward hesitated visibly. "I don't think that's a good idea," he began. "Clara can be unpredictable." "Please," Sophia insisted, touching his arm lightly, "just for a few minutes." "Woman to woman." Edward studied her face, clearly torn. 5 minutes, he finally agreed. "I'll be right outside." When the door closed behind him, Sophia turned back to Clara, who was watching her with a mixture of curiosity and distrust. "Has he kissed you yet?" Clara asked abruptly. "Yes," Sophia admitted, deciding honesty was the best approach. "And did you feel like you were melting inside? Like you had finally found someone who truly sees you?" Sophia hesitated, disturbed by the accuracy of the description. "Something like that." Clara leaned forward, her hands trembling slightly. "Listen to me carefully. There's still time for you. I was naive, impulsive. By the time I found out the truth, it was too late." "What truth, Clara?" Her eyes darted nervously to the door, then back to Sophia. "About his sister. About what really happened." Sophia felt a chill. "The fire." Clara nodded vigorously. "It wasn't an accident. Edward was 12, not 7, like he says. And it wasn't matches. It was deliberate." Sophia felt her mouth go dry. "How do you know that?" "I found the original police report, hidden in a secret compartment in his office, along with other documents, about other women, before me." Sophia tried to stay calm to process what she was hearing. "Why would he commit you if you knew something like that? Wouldn't it be easier to silence you permanently?" The shadow crossed Clara's face. "Because he loved me in his own twisted way. He couldn't destroy me completely. So he put me here, where no one would believe my word against his, and—" Her voice broke. "Because he likes to visit, to see what he's done to me. It's part of his sick game." Sophia didn't know what to think. Clara seemed lucid, articulate, but the accusations were so serious, so extreme, and the medication could create a false impression of lucidity. "Find Mariana," Clara whispered, suddenly gripping her arm with surprising strength. "On Hilton Head Island. Horizon Gallery. She knows everything. She has proof." Sophia looked at Clara's hand on her arm, then at the face so similar to her own. "I already know about Mariana," she confessed. "I found her business card." A flash of hope lit up Clara's eyes. "So you were already investigating," she concluded, releasing Sophia's arm. "Well, that's unexpectedly sensible." "I still don't know what to think, Clara," Sophia admitted. "Edward has been kind, considerate—" "As he was with me," Clara interrupted. "As he was with all of them. In the beginning, it's always a fairy tale. Then it becomes a nightmare." The door opened, revealing Edward and Dr. Mendez. "Time's up," the doctor announced politely. "The patient needs her medication now." Clara looked at Sophia with intensity. "Decide soon," she murmured, for her ears only, "before it's too late." On the way back to White Point, Sophia remained silent, mentally replaying the conversation with Clara. Edward respected her silence, though he occasionally cast worried glances in her direction. "She seemed more lucid than I expected," Sophia finally commented, testing the waters. Edward sighed. "Clara always has periods of apparent lucidity. It's part of the pattern. She seems perfectly rational, until she starts talking about conspiracies, persecution, absurd accusations." He turned to face her. "What did she say when you were alone?" Sophia carefully considered her answer. "She mentioned your sister." "The fire." A shadow crossed Edward's face. "Her distorted version of events, I suppose." "She said you were 12, not 7. That it was deliberate." Edward was very quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was controlled, but Sophia could feel the underlying tension. I was 8 when it happened, not 12. And it was a terrible accident, not a deliberate act. He looked her in the eyes. Do you believe that? That I would be capable of hurting my own sister? Sophia held his gaze. I don't know what to believe, Edward. I'm trying to piece it all together. The pieces of a puzzle Clara invented in her disturbed mind, he replied with a touch of bitterness. I thought you were different, that you could see beyond appearances. I'm trying, Sophia assured him, touching his hand hesitantly. I just need time. Edward laced his fingers through hers, squeezing gently. Time is something we have in abundance at White Point, he said, a sad smile touching his lips. The house has been waiting for centuries. It can wait a little longer. That night in her room, Sophia couldn't sleep. Images of Clara mixed with memories of Edward in her mind, creating a confusing mosaic of potential truths and lies. She needed more information. She needed to talk to Mariana Cole. The next day at breakfast, she announced, I need to go to Charleston. A quick visit to my mother. Maybe spend the night. I'll be back tomorrow afternoon. Edward studied her face for a moment as if looking for signs of a lie. Of course, he finally agreed. Take the limousine. The driver can wait for you. I'd rather go alone, Sophia replied quickly. Take a bus. Like I used to keep my feet on the ground. Something flickered in Edward's eyes, suspicion. Concern? But he just nodded. As you wish. But take this. He handed her a gold credit card. For emergencies. And because your mother might need something. Sophia accepted the card, feeling a pang of guilt for the lie. But it was necessary. Instead of going to Charleston, Sophia took a bus to Hilton Head Island. The journey was long and tiring, but it gave her time to reflect, to organize her thoughts and questions. She arrived on Hilton Head in the late afternoon. The Horizon Gallery was in the historic part of town, a small, elegant space specializing in contemporary Southern art. When Sophia entered, a middle-aged woman with grey hair cut in a modern bob and colorful glasses approached, smiling. May I help you? I'm looking for Mariana Cole, Sophia replied nervously. That's me, the woman confirmed, her smile faltering slightly. Do we know each other? No, Sophia admitted. But I knew Clara Middleton. Mariana's face transformed instantly. The cordial smile gave way to an expression of shock, then intense concern. How is Clara? Where did you see her? Is she okay? Sophia hesitated. She's at the Serene Mind Clinic. She's a patient. I visited her yesterday. Mariana paled. My God, so it's true. He really did have her committed. She looked around nervously. We can't talk here. Come with me. She led Sophia to the back of the gallery, up a narrow staircase to a small apartment above the exhibition space. It was a cozy, artistic place, with paintings on the walls and books stacked everywhere. Who are you exactly? Mariana asked, motioning for Sophia to sit on a worn sofa. And how did you meet Clara? Sophia explained briefly. Her hiring by Edward, the discovery of Clara's diary, the physical resemblance, her growing suspicions. As she spoke, Mariana watched her with an increasingly alarmed expression. My God, it's like history is repeating itself, she murmured when Sophia finished. You're just as Clara described herself when she met Edward. Smart, dedicated, a little reserved, and obviously the physical appearance. Do you think he sought me out deliberately because of the resemblance? Sophia asked, feeling a chill. I don't think, I'm sure, Mariana replied firmly. Edward Graham has a pattern. Clara wasn't the first. She got up and went to a bookshelf from which she pulled a large folder. She opened it on the coffee table, revealing photographs, newspaper clippings, notes. Clara sent me this shortly before she disappeared, she explained. She said if anything happened to her, I should go to the authorities. Sophia examined the folder's contents with growing horror. There were photographs of at least 3 other women, all bearing a striking resemblance to each other, and to Sophia. Newspaper clippings reported mysterious disappearances or accidental deaths. One in particular caught her eye. Young architect dies in historic mansion fire, 2010. This is impossible, Sophia murmured, feeling sick. Clara discovered all this while researching the Graham family history for a cataloguing project, Mariana explained. At first they were just strange coincidences, then disturbing patterns. The first was Maria Lucia in 2010. Then Vanessa in 2015. Both had accidents. Then came Clara. Why didn't you take this to the police? Mariana laughed bitterly. I did. You know what they told me? That it was baseless speculation against one of the most powerful and respected men in South Carolina. That Edward Graham was a philanthropist, a preserver of cultural heritage, an exemplary businessman. She shook her head. Without concrete evidence, without a body, there's no crime. Sophia continued to examine the documents, feeling increasingly nauseous. There were detailed notes from Clara about the subtle changes in Edward's behavior, how his initial interest evolved into admiration, then possessiveness, control, and finally, obsession. The pattern was frighteningly familiar. What do you think really happened to Clara? Sophia finally asked. Mariana hesitated. I think when she found out the truth about Edward's sister, that he really did kill her in the fire, probably out of jealousy for the attention she got from their father, he realized he couldn't control her anymore. She sighed heavily. But he also couldn't just kill her like he did the others. Clara had sent me this information, left clues, so he created a third option. Commit her, discredit her as mentally unstable. And now, me, Sophia concluded, a tremor running through her body. Exactly, Mariana confirmed, looking at her with genuine concern. Oh, you're the next one in the pattern. Sophia sat in silence for a few minutes, trying to absorb everything she had discovered. The truth was darker, more disturbing than her worst suspicions. I have to get out of White Point, she said finally. Tonight. But my mother, she needs the treatment Edward is funding. Mariana squeezed her hand in solidarity. We can find a solution for that. I have some contacts in the healthcare sector. The important thing is that you get out of that house immediately. Sophia nodded, feeling a determination grow within her. There's one last thing I need to do first, she said, a plan beginning to form in her mind. I need concrete proof, something the police can't ignore this time. It's too dangerous, Mariana warned. Edward is smart, careful, and if he realizes what you're doing... I have no choice, Sophia replied firmly. If we don't stop him now, there will be more women after me. The cycle will continue. Sophia spent the night in Mariana's small apartment, discussing strategies, making plans. The next day, she returned to White Point, carrying not only the newfound truth but also a clear purpose. Edward greeted her with apparent joy, asking about her mother, offering more financial help for the treatment. Sophia played her part perfectly, grateful, slightly shy, gradually surrendering to his charm. During dinner, she proposed a toast to our relationship, which is evolving into something I never imagined possible. Edward's eyes shone with satisfaction. Everything was going according to his pattern, Sophia thought bitterly. I want to show you something, he said after dinner. A special gift. He led her to his private bedroom, a room Sophia had never entered before. It was a surprisingly austere space for a man of such wealth. A large but simple bed, bookshelves covering the walls, an antique desk near the window, and on the bed a black velvet box. Open it, Edward encouraged, his intense gaze fixed on her. Sophia approached cautiously, opened the box. Inside was a black pearl necklace with a diamond pendant. It was my mother's, Edward explained. The only memento I have of her. I want you to have it. The symbolism was not lost on Sophia. It was a gesture of commitment, of possession, exactly as described in Clara's notes. It's beautiful, she murmured, feigning emotion. I don't know if I can accept something so significant. Edward took the necklace and moved behind her. Let me put it on, he said softly. To see how it looks. As he fastened the clasp around her neck, Sophia felt a shiver that had nothing to do with desire. His hands on her nape were gentle, but she now knew what those same hands had done. Perfect, Edward declared, turning her to face him. As if it were made for you. He kissed her then, with more passion than ever before. Sophia responded, hating herself for it, but knowing it was necessary for her plan. When he finally pulled away, his eyes were dark with desire. Stay with me tonight, he asked, his voice hoarse. Sophia hesitated, as she knew he would expect. I'm not sure if I'm... Ready, she said, lowering her eyes. Edward smiled with understanding. No pressure. Just sleep here with me, nothing more. Sophia nodded slowly, as if giving in. Let me just get a few things from my room first, she requested. When she returned to his room minutes later, she brought not only a modest nightgown, but also a small recorder hidden in her purse, borrowed from Mariana. The night was torture. Lying next to Edward, feeling his warmth, hearing his breathing gradually slow to the rhythm of sleep, Sophia remained awake, alert. When she was sure he was deeply asleep, she rose silently. There was an area of the room that had caught her attention, a panel on the wall that looked slightly different from the rest. Following the clues left by Clara, Sophia examined it carefully in the faint moonlight filtering through the window. She found a hidden mechanism, pressed it. The panel slid silently open, revealing a small secret office. In the center, an antique desk. On it, meticulously organized, were diaries, at least 5 volumes, all identical to Clara's, except for their different colors. Sophia turned on the recorder and began photographing the pages with her phone, moving quickly but carefully to avoid making noise. The diaries told horrifying stories of psychological manipulation, control, sick possessiveness. Each volume belonged to a different woman. Each story followed the same basic pattern, culminating in accidents or disappearances. At the back of the desk, she found a folder marked Beatrice. Inside was the original police report on the fire that had killed Edward's sister. The date confirmed it. He was 12, not 7, and the investigators' preliminary conclusions pointed to suspicious circumstances. Though the case had eventually been closed as an accident, presumably thanks to the Graham family's influence. Sophia methodically photographed everything, her heart hammering against her ribs. She was almost finished when she heard a sound behind her, the soft creak of a floorboard. She turned slowly, her phone still in her hand. Edward was standing in the entrance to the secret office, fully dressed now, watching her with an unreadable expression. "I knew you were different," he said, his voice strangely calm. "Smarter, more cautious. That's why I chose you, Sophia. You present a greater challenge." Sophia felt the blood run cold in her veins, but she maintained her composure. "How long have you known I was investigating?" she asked, buying time, mentally calculating the distance to the door. Edward smiled, a cold smile that never reached his eyes. "From the beginning." "The cameras, remember? Clara mentioned them in her diary. I knew you'd find it eventually. It was part of the game." "A game?" Sophia repeated, horrified. "These women's lives were a game to you?" Edward took a step forward. Sophia backed away, feeling the desk press against her back. "Not just a game," he corrected. "A purification, a replacement. Each of them carried a part of Beatrice, my sister whom fate unjustly took from me." His eyes shone with a feverish intensity. "But none of them were perfect. None were complete. Until you." Nausea rose in Sophia's throat. "You're sick, Edward," she said firmly. "You need help," he laughed, a hollow, humorless sound. "The same thing Clara said before I had to silence her, before she forced me to put her in that clinic." He took another step forward. "But you won't make the same mistake, will you, Sophia? You understand. You will stay with me, willingly. And if I refuse," Edward's smile vanished, "then unfortunately we will have to follow the same path as Clara, or worse, as Maria Lucia and Vanessa." He made a sweeping gesture. "No one will miss you. Your mother? She'll be too busy with her new experimental treatment, which I can stop at any moment with a single phone call." Sophia felt a wave of pure rage surge through her. Not fear, but fury at the calculated cruelty of this man who had manipulated so many lives. "You're not going to hurt anyone else," she declared, her voice surprisingly firm. "It's over, Edward." He tilted his head, studying her with curiosity. "And how do you plan to stop me?" With a swift movement, Sophia held up her phone. "I have proof. Photographs of all the diaries, of the police report on Beatrice. And this," she pulled the small recorder from her pocket. "Your confession recorded." Edward's expression changed instantly, from cold control to incandescent fury. "You will not leave this house with that," he snarled, lunging at her. Sophia dodged, running toward the door. Edward caught her in the hallway, grabbing her arm with brutal force. She screamed, more from surprise than pain, and tried to break free. The ensuing struggle was brief and violent. Edward, consumed by rage, lost the calculated control that characterized him. Sophia, driven by survival instinct and the determination to expose the truth, managed to break away. She ran through the mansion's corridors, Edward hot on her heels. She reached the main staircase, stumbling down it. At the entrance, she found Mrs. Carmen awakened by the noise. "He's trying to kill me!" Sophia yelled, breathless, like he did the others. The housekeeper's expression changed, from confusion to a heavy understanding. "Go," the elderly woman said, positioning herself in the path of Edward, who was descending the stairs furiously. Through the kitchen. "The gardener has a car. The keys are hanging near the back door." Sophia hesitated only a second before running in the indicated direction. Behind her, she could hear Edward shouting, threatening. She found the keys, ran out the back door into the dark garden. The car, a simple old model, was parked near the service gate. Sophia got in, started the engine with trembling hands. By the time Edward emerged from the house, she was already speeding down the stone path. She drove down the winding road as if demons were chasing her, which, in a way, was true. When she reached the main highway, she realized she had no clear plan. Where to go? Who to turn to? She decided to go back to Hilton Head Island, to Mariana. There she would be safe, could organize the evidence, contact the authorities. Dawn found her on the coastal highway, exhausted but determined. When she finally arrived at the Horizon Gallery, Mariana greeted her with a tight hug and tears in her eyes. "Thank God," the older woman murmured. "I thought I'd never see you again." Sophia showed her the photographs, the recording. Together they organized all the material, made copies, prepared a complete dossier. Mariana knew an investigative journalist in Charleston, someone who wasn't afraid to take on powerful figures. They sent him everything, along with a detailed explanation. 3 days later, the story exploded in newspapers and on television news across the country. Carolina Millionaire accused of murder and forced commitment of women. The FBI took over the case, bypassing Edward's local connections. The Serene Mind Clinic was investigated, and Clara Middleton was finally freed. The reunion between Clara and Sophia was emotional, two women so physically similar, now united by a shared traumatic experience, by a common search for truth and justice. "Thank you," Clara said, hugging Sophia tightly, "for believing me, for freeing me." "Thank you for leaving clues," Sophia replied, smiling through her tears, "for not giving up." In the weeks that followed, life slowly began to piece itself back together. Sophia's mother was transferred to an excellent public hospital, her treatment secured by an NGO that offered help after reading her story in the news. Clara went to live temporarily with Mariana, beginning a long process of psychological recovery. Sophia found a job at a historical document preservation institute in Charleston, where her talent was valued, her story respected. Edward Graham was arrested and held without bail, awaiting trial. White Point Mansion was closed, its fate uncertain. There was talk of turning it into a cultural center, or perhaps a museum, a place of light where there had once been shadows. One Sunday afternoon, 6 months after the events at White Point, Sophia was walking along the beach on Hilton Head Island, watching the calm sea, reflecting on how her life had changed. Clara and Mariana had invited her for lunch later, a small celebration for Clara's birthday. As she walked barefoot on the warm sand, Sophia thought of Edward, not with hatred or fear, but with a kind of sad understanding. A brilliant, talented man, destroyed by childhood trauma and sick obsessions. A predator, yes, but also a victim of himself, of his own demons. There were moments, Sophia admitted only to herself, when she still missed the Edward she had known at the beginning, the cultured man who spoke about books with genuine passion, who seemed to understand her like no one before. It was hard to reconcile that version of him with the monster that had later emerged. Harder still was to admit that for a brief moment she had truly loved him, or at least loved the person he pretended to be. A young coconut vendor approached, offering his refreshing merchandise. Sophia bought one, thanking him with a smile. As she drank the sweet liquid, she noticed a man sitting alone further down the beach reading a book. There was something in his posture, in the focused way he turned the pages, that caught her attention. For a terrible instant, she thought it was Edward, somehow free, chasing her again. Her heart raced, her breath became shallow. But then the man looked up and Sophia saw he was just a stranger, an ordinary young man enjoying a book on the beach. She breathed a sigh of relief, then laughed at her own paranoia. Edward was in jail. The nightmare was over. And here she was, free, alive, finally the author of her own story. Sophia finished her coconut and continued walking down the beach, toward the uncertain but her own future. Only hers. The sun shone brightly, reflecting on the waves like thousands of diamonds. In the distance, she could see Clara and Mariana, waving to her from the veranda of a beachfront restaurant. She waved back, smiling. Some scars would never completely disappear. Some fears would remain hidden in the shadows of her mind. But Sophia had learned something valuable at White Point, something that not even Edward, with all his manipulation, could take from her. The strength that came from facing her own abysses and emerging on the other side, still whole, still herself. In the pocket of her light skirt, her fingers touched the small diary Edward had given her, the only object she had brought from White Point. She had recently started using it, no longer to record fears or secrets, but to plan her future, to dream. The first entry, written the night before, began like this. Today I choose to begin again, not as a survivor, but as the creator of my own story. The pages ahead are blank, waiting to be filled.